Hello and good afternoon. My name is Nico Heller, and this is Reboot 2030, a Democracy School podcast and YouTube channel. The context for today's dialogue is the international environment, and what we are looking at is how international cooperation between governments has developed or changed over the last few years, with the pandemic first, and now, of course, with the war in Ukraine. I guess the backdrop to this is that we believe international cooperation is more important than ever before. Climate change, public health, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and so forth. There's plenty of topics that cannot be solved by a single government, and yet we are now at a period of retrenchment, of withdrawal, of putting up barriers, putting up walls, and that can really, in the medium to long term, only be a bad thing. Now, my guest today is John Bunzl. John is an international businessman, so he knows the international environment from a business perspective. And he's also an activist and the founder of SIMPOL. He founded SIMPOL, the simultaneous policy organization, in 2000, and has been developing it with great energy and vision ever since. Now, what SIMPOL actually is and what it does, John will explain to us in a moment, but let me just say that it was born at a time when globalization ruled supreme, and there was a strong belief that international cooperation was the way forward. Multilateralism was at its height, was seen as a good thing by most players. And so in many ways, the idea of an organization that supports international cooperation was a sort of a child of its time and was very timely. The situation has changed, so it's a good time to look at how an organization like SIMPOL, how they make sense of this new environment, and what kind of opportunities and challenges they see going forward. I can see that John has arrived, so I will invite him in. John, good to see you.
Hi, Nico. How you doing?
Not too bad. I can see you have moved your computer to another spot in the house.
For a change.
Things change, don't they? They never stand still. Excellent. How are you doing?
Good, not too bad. I've got a bit of a cough, I'm afraid, but I hope it won't disturb us too much.
I can hear you well, and I think it's this time of the year where people have coughs, so join the club.
Yeah, right. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much. John, I just said a very few words about you, that you have a background in international business, and so you know the international environment from a competitive point of view, and that you founded SIMPOL, the Simultaneous Policy Organization, in 2000. Of course, back then when you founded it, the world looked very different. And in some ways, SIMPOL was a sort of a child of its time. Globalization ruled supreme, and most people would have seen international cooperation as the way forward. Multilateralism was kind of the established rule, and we sort of had seen sort of divisions melt away. Russia had moved closer, China had moved closer, India had moved closer, and it looked for a while as if we were all going to be one happy big family. Now, of course, that was not to last, and we're now looking at a very different world. So before we go into what that means for somebody like SIMPOL, who's very much built on the premise of international cooperation, let's sort of start from the beginning for the viewers who don't know what SIMPOL actually is. So tell me, first of all, why is it needed? What does it do? What is its purpose? And how, in your view, will it revolutionize, if you like, the way governments cooperate, especially on issues that have a direct impact on their competitiveness?
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, the basic premise of SIMPOL is that the global problems that we think are the problem, like climate change, nuclear weapons, wealth inequality, all of these global issues that we think are the problem, are not the real underlying problem. Because what is stopping governments from actually tackling these issues substantively is that any government that moves first to cut its emissions or to cut its weapons or to do the right thing will give itself an economic or military competitive disadvantage. So there is a first mover disadvantage problem. And it is that is underlies why governments are not acting adequately on any of these issues that we care about. So the idea of simultaneous policy, or SIMPOL for short, is that we drive governments to act on these issues simultaneously. If sufficient, all or sufficient nations act together simultaneously, nobody need lose out, nobody's competitiveness would suffer, businesses would have nowhere to run to avoid the regulations and so forth. And so there are really sort of three main planks to SIMPOL. The first is simultaneous implementation, as I've just outlined. The second is that it would encompass what I call a multi-issue policy framework. That means that any SIMPOL would be a series of simultaneously implemented agreements, but each of those agreements would contain multiple issues. Why? Because if you take any single issue like carbon emissions, there will always be some nations that win, others that lose, and of course the losers then have no incentive to cooperate. And it's not surprising that we're not getting anywhere. What are we on COP 25, 20, 30? So I don't know where we are anymore. How many, So the idea with SIMPOL is that we combine two or more complementary issues together. So for example, just very crudely expressed, you might have a global wealth tax or a global currency transactions tax simultaneously implemented alongside a climate agreement, so that the proceeds from the tax can be used to compensate the big losers on the climate part of the agreement. I know it's easier said than done, and it's much more complex, but it seems to me that unless we have this sort of multi-issue approach, we're never ever going to get anywhere. And the final aspect of SIMPOL is that it's unique in that citizens can actually use their votes, or at least those citizens in democratic countries can use their votes to drive politicians of all parties towards signing up to this. And the way we do that is simply by joining the SIMPOL campaign, excuse me, which is free of charge. And basically that means that you agree to give strong preference at all future national elections to politicians or candidates or parties who have signed the pledge to implement SIMPOL. And so that doesn't mean you have to vote for a candidate that signs up to SIMPOL, but it's telling all candidates that you as a citizen is going to give strong preference to those that have. And so this creates a very strong competition between politicians, because if they sign up, they have the chance of gaining the votes of SIMPOL supporters. If they fail to sign up, but their competitor signed up, they could lose out, right? So it's putting a very powerful incentive. And through this process, we've already managed to get over 100 UK members of parliament from all the political parties to sign up. We've got, I don't know, about 30 or so in Germany, about 15, 20 in Ireland, one in France, and a handful in other countries as well. So obviously there's a long way to go. And then the idea is that having got things going in democratic countries, the non-democratic countries who also, of course, need solutions to global problems could voluntarily join the process. So that's it in principle. But as you say, the world has changed.
So let's just go. So you have these three pillars. One is that policy has to be made simultaneously. One is that there has to be multi-issues, so that there's an opportunity for trade-offs and for horse trading, essentially. And the third is that there has to be some pressure from the kind of electorate, or pressure or support. I mean, whatever way you want to articulate that.
Electoral pressure.
Backing from the people who back the politicians, who back the campaign. So these are the three elements. Now, what jumps out at me is that in practice, in my sort of limited experience of sort of high-level negotiation, it's always multi-issue. Because, of course, if you invite me for a discussion and say, well, I know what you want to talk to me about, but I'm going to say, well, I'm only going to go to talk to John if I have an issue in my bag as well. And at that point, we're going to say, well, okay, if you give me this, I'll give you that. And I think this kind of horse trading happens all the time. Now, of course, what you're kind of saying.
Hang on, Nick. Well, it does happen in normal diplomacy. You're quite right. I mean, there was a YouTube international relations series called, I know, International Relations 101. And one of the first videos is issue linkage. Okay, it's exactly as you described. So why is it that in climate negotiations we're just talking about one issue, which effectively is carbon emissions? You know, it just doesn't make any sense. So it seems to me that the standard playbook, which, as you say, is in a sense normal. And as a businessman, I know, of course, you know, you're absolutely right. Why is it that on global issues like climate, we are trying to do it with just one issue?
I think there's a bit of strategy going on here. I mean, for example, take the recent COP27 conference of parties in Egypt, where they were kind of wrestling for days and days and days to see how they're going to compensate developing countries for the loss and the damage they suffer as a result of climate change. And the Southern Hemisphere, broadly speaking, was very adamant they wanted to have a separate institution, a separate organization, which is now becoming the Loss and Damage Fund. Northern Hemisphere organization said, well, why? We've got the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, we've got institutions, we can reform them, we can basically, but of course, these existing institutions are heavily dominated by those very countries that fund them, sort of Northern Hemisphere countries, Europe, North America, and there's very little representation of the countries that will receive the funding. So of course you can see the power struggle that was going on between the haves and the have-nots, and between, you know, who decides what. And of course this was going on for days and days and days behind closed doors, and in the end, you know, they decided to create a loss and damage fund. Now, what I'm sort of speculating is that a lot of backroom deals went on along the way. Now, of course, the problem is you and I don't know what these deals are. You know, so we don't actually know whether these deals then involve drilling, you know, for oil in the Congo, which would be counterintuitive and counterproductive, given that it's a climate deal. We don't know. So there's a lot of backroom things. So I think one of the things that your approach does, and this is very much, if you like, in the spirit of democracy, of course, is it brings transparency to this. You know, whether we have or have not in the past had a bargaining environment, which I believe we did, what we did not have is any transparency and any accountability within that context. So the only thing we did is we were highlighting the one issue and drawing all the media attention to that one issue, and all the side dealing that was going on, some of which might have been quite destructive, went uncommented and reported. So I think this is a really interesting way of saying, well, let's just make it official. You know, let's make the kind of the sort of the multi-issue environment public.
Well, yes, but I think it's more than that, because what you can be sure about, I think, Nico, fairly sure, is that this fund, administered by the World Bank or by the IMF or whoever, it won't be being necessarily doled out to developing countries free of interest. You know, there will be some strings attached. But what we can also be sure is that this money is not coming from any new resources. And that's why there's such a fight about it. If there were a global wealth tax or a global currency transactions tax, we would have additional resources. So, you know, my point is that really, you know, we're squabbling about a sort of very small slice of the pie, because we're not enlarging that resource, you know, that revenue pie through the kind of global taxes that we really ought to have.
That's right. That's right. And of course,
but as you say, it would also be more transparent, which I think is also absolutely right. Yes,
absolutely. And the point you've just made, which is of course entirely true. I mean, the UN is notoriously underfunded. I mean, I don't know how many years in membership the US, for example, is behind, and if you look at certain branches within the UN, like the refugee UNHCR, they are massively underfunded. When you look at the various kind of UN initiatives, they're begging for funding because they're not getting up to the funding level that they should be having. So just because there's going to be a loss and damage fund, and just because countries have pledged some funding, doesn't actually mean that that funding will ever arrive, certainly not at the level that it was pledged. But of course, all of these issues that we're discussing now, they really become much more transparent once you are making it a very transparent multi-issue debate, so that the trade-offs are clear, the costs and benefits are clear to all involved. And of course, you have got this additional really interesting twist in your concept, and that is the kind of the politician's role in sponsoring it. What that means is now you actually have champions of the deal, and they can, a bit like what they should do as politicians anyway, go back to their constituents and report on how these things are going, and whether they are going well.
Well, it's even more than that, Nico, because as the support for SIMPOL grows, and that voting bloc of SIMPOL citizens grow, we can actually dictate, or we could dictate the policies, that the politicians have to implement. Because if they don't, well, they risk not getting our vote and losing their seats. So it goes even beyond that, or potentially it could. So yes, I think the sort of citizen electoral pressure is vital, because without that, any failure in international negotiations, the politician comes back to his home country and says, well, we failed, but because we were protecting the national interest. There's always this excuse, and usually there's probably a competitive disadvantage problem behind it. So with SIMPOL, we would be just completely cutting through all of that bullshit,
Absolutely, absolutely. So, it's intuitive, and you were sort of saying earlier that you only have got so many politicians, parliamentarians backing it so far. Well, you could turn this around and you could say you've actually been quite successful by attracting this level of support, at this point. And I do think. My intuitive sense is that, like most things, it take a proportional representation in the UK. It's an abstract thing, and you can't win an election on it because it's an abstract thing. And Lib Dem has tried it for many years, and whenever they kind of make it, nobody really. People do care, but you place that next to the NHS or to any other kind of real issue, and it fades in insignificance. And I think you have a bit of that problem as well, that it is really a structural innovation, and structure is not something that really inspires people in a big way, generally speaking.
So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Nico. That is our problem. But I think it's, SIMPOL is it's almost like a lifeboat. Nobody's interested in it until the ship is really going down. So we are up against that problem. But we keep going simply because, there is no other better solution that I've ever come across. So sort of dismal as the hopes appear, we still keep going. Can I just add one other thing, actually, Nick? I've talked about citizen pressure, but also, to be fair, many of the politicians have signed up with very little citizen pressure. Because they when they see the logic of it, they say, yeah, this makes sense, I'll sign up. So I think there's we shouldn't underestimate the kind of common sense appeal of SIMPOL. It's not just all about electoral pressure, it's about common sense, actually.
Oh, absolutely. But that does bring me back to proportional representation. You ask people in the UK, a lot of people see the common sense in it. Some don't, but a lot do. And of course, it doesn't really kind of win you votes in an election. So there is a real kind of conundrum here. And I think it's kind of comparable. But and there's another problem. And I totally, I sense that as a real problem. So for me, you gave the lifeboat analogy. Now, I could say, well, actually, that ship is sinking, and that ship is called planet Earth, and the storm is called climate change, and it's sinking. And so here are the lifeboats. And, so one, of course, strategic choice would be to say, let's attach or let's run with a specific issue and see whether that kind of brings to life the potential and what it can do. So rather than trying to be all things to all people, which it actually is, and that's its power, of course, let's just to basically get through that kind of initial kind of sort of like, proof of concept phase, let's jump onto like an issue that is on many people's minds, where nobody has a solution. For example, climate change, and let's see whether we can make it like with a limited kind of example, with a limited kind of pilot, whether we can make it work there. And if that works, then of course we can evaluate that, and that can be a stepping stone to. But of course, one thing that we are doing with that, we're kind of giving it a color, don't we? We're kind of in a way saying, oh well, these are the kind of the climate people. And then if you then want to go to another group of nations who have got very different problems and are maybe a bit kind of critical of the climate thing, they may feel excluded and may no longer be interested because it's sort of so closely associated with the climate. But of course, I think that is a problem that you have to square. Which example do you pick? Which kind of initial case do you pick to exclude the minimum number of kind of people, if you like, but have the maximum impact? My sense is that climate would be a good one, because you can make that case in so many different ways. And really, I mean, from a kind of a purely scientific perspective, it seems difficult to see how we can have a future without actually squaring that circle. There seems to be a real set of issues that we really have to get our head around. So maybe climate would be a way of doing this.
Right, sorry, I have to take myself off mute. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think if we, having a pilot issue would be the best way to demonstrate SIMPOL's effectiveness and viability. The problem we generally have, Nico, is that sadly, the very people that one would expect to be supporting SIMPOL, the activists, whether it's Extinction Rebellion or whether it's Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, don't tend to resonate with SIMPOL, because I think, and over the years we've tried many times to approach them, but what we find is that they seem to have a mindset which is very much, well, we just need to shout loud enough, we just need to protest long enough, and then the government will do what we want. And what SIMPOL is saying is, look, it's not that governments don't want to act, it's that they can't act unilaterally because of the competition problem. But that's an argument that the NGOs just don't want to hear. The activists, they don't want to hear it because they think it's like a moral issue, so unfortunately, in many respects, you say we've been quite successful with politicians. I think that's the reason, is because the politicians understand better that, the global competition problem. The activists who really ought to be supporting SIMPOL don't understand it at all because they're not business people.
But you see, this is interesting because you're a businessman yourself. And of course, you have the aura of a businessman, and you walk into a room of, well, in a good way, but you walk into a room of people who have got an NGO background, and they will have a very different aura, and there's a different culture surrounding them. So clearly there is a kind of, if you like, a bit of a culture clash, and that is, that is obviously part of the problem. But having said that, I kind of wonder whether one shouldn't take the business approach forward, because of course, the biggest losers and also the biggest winners in a sustainable future clearly must be businesses. I mean,
I agree.
Whatever way you look at it. So in a way, what you could do is you could sort of say, well, let's not go for the NGOs. Let's go for a global business alliance.
Yeah, we're working on that, Nico. Yeah, we're working on that.
But because that to me seems to be the other way to go, and also they will understand the competition issues because of course they are directly impacted by them. So it seems to me that they are your natural constituency to take this forward. And then, of course, there's places like the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and others who have a kind of a representative role to play in the international regulation of business as well. So again, maybe there might be interest there too. So I think maybe developing that kind of road might be more.
Yeah, we're trying to do that, and you know, also particularly with B Corp, the B Corporation, with was it the Business Council for Sustainable Development. You know, we're talking to all of these people. So yeah, I hope that business will see the sense in it, because as you say, you know, most business people, they want to be in business for the next 50 years, not just for the next 5. And the way things are going, you know, that time frame is getting shorter and shorter. So yeah, so yeah, there are challenges, as you say.
Yeah, and the other thing that this is just sort of crossing my mind in terms of making it, if you like, more tangible, moving from concept to something that is approaching to be something like a service or a product that could be offered as a product or service to governments within that context, so that you could actually at some point even put, you know, be proactive about it and sort of say, well, we invite you, you know, whatever the kind of the Googles and Microsofts of this world, invite, you know, governments to a global conference because we think here's a way we can help you solve these issues. We do a big conference in Davos or wherever it would be, and at that conference, basically, governments would sign up to a trial run on a particular issue, just to see how that works and how they can essentially sort of integrate their own administrations and their own bureaucracies into that process. And I wonder what would that business, what would that organization look like? Would it be built around a technology platform, like so that, if you like, a communications platform? Would that be the centerpiece, if you like, from a facilitation point of view, from the kind of the SIMPOL point of view? Or would it be built around a conferencing business, or would it be built around a logistics business? What would this SIMPOL organization that facilitates this, what would it be? Would it be a services business, a software business,
Well, that's a good question. I mean, clearly, we will need the assistance of artificial intelligence and you know, other methodologies for assessing policy, you know, policy proposals that are made, because of course, you know, what would the effect be of the simultaneous implementation of policy X or policy Y? And you know, there are people who and institutions that can help with that. So that would be one aspect.
So you could almost, I mean, I'm just trying to kind of, you know, if I want to kind of somehow specify, if you like, the company infrastructure. So what you're talking about here is essentially a highly sophisticated next generation project management environment, where people can remotely kind of log in and participate in all kinds of, you know, like we do now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in a sense, SIMPOL would be like would have the infrastructure of a transnational political party, but it's not a political party, because we are using our votes to drive up the other parties to sign up to it. So it would have the very much the structure, I think, of a transnational political party with chapters in each country, and indeed we already have websites for the different national SIMPOL organizations. But you know, beyond that, Nico, we haven't really sort of mapped it out in any way, because we are really at the earlier stages of trying to get the basic concept better understood and supported. And there is still, as we were saying earlier, there's a long way to go before we get to that point. So we haven't really thought a great deal further than that. at this stage.
So when you sign, and I totally get that, of course, John. I mean, it's so easy for me to sit here and to throw these questions at you. I totally get that you have to get the basics in place first, and that in itself is a lot of work and actually quite a lot of complexity as well, because as you say, you are developing chapters in different countries, and there's there's a lot of work involved in all of that. But when you think about sort of moving this forward, 10 years ago, you probably would have, the world looked very, very differently. Moving it forward would have been, in a way, simpler, because you wouldn't have been thinking in terms of East and West, or you wouldn't have been thinking in terms of, all the kind of, I mean, with climate change, it's very difficult to think about a solution that doesn't include both China and the US, for example, the two biggest polluters. But of course, they are now, they're kind of talking, but they're not really kind of in a very constructive relationship at the moment. So how have these developments, these changes affected SIMPOL and its development?
Yeah, well, I would say that, there's no doubt you're absolutely right in what you say, that the whole idea of global cooperation in the current environment sounds completely crazy. So I would say that SIMPOL is kind of going into kind of quiet mode, let's say, at the moment. But I think that the global problems that SIMPOL is designed to solve, like climate, aren't going to go away. And sooner or later, the war will end, or there will be another one in Taiwan. But eventually, it might not be in my lifetime, but sooner or later, humanity as a whole is going to have to deal with these issues. And when it does, they're going to be looking for a really good lifeboat. And so I think our task in SIMPOL is really to keep going, regardless, in a way, of the shorter term craziness that we're seeing, all of which actually, Nico, you could say, one of the things that just shows how costly non-cooperation is. Look at what the higher prices we're having to pay for everything now. That's the price we pay for not cooperating. So we can see very clearly the incentive. However, from a practical point of view, that isn't going to happen until these other issues, are resolved, and that may take many, many years. I don't know, but as I say, the kind of problems we're talking about can't be solved without the main players, China, the US, and so something like SIMPOL is going to be required. It seems to me, at some point.
My sense is that like at the global level, the polarization and the split that we have seen between East and West, and the way countries position themselves along that axis again, has meant that there's massively reduced kind of cooperation across that axis. But at the same time, what we see is a massively increased need on both sides of the axis. So on the one hand, we're doing less trade, or we're doing less kind of, we're cooperating less with China or Russia. But on the other hand, certainly within Europe, there should be an awful lot more cooperation around like a unified military strategy, for example, or loads of issues you can think of. And of course, that would also include the US. And so in a way, what you could, and this is my question here, is to what extent do you have to keep that global perspective alive, or could you also sort of say, well, okay, for now we're using it to essentially unite that one half of the world, and because it would be just so impossible to bring it all back together at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that did cross our minds, when the war first started and so forth. But I don't really think that's what SIMPOL is about. It's not really about partial cooperation. It's about the time when it's about climate change. It's about nuclear weapons proliferation. It's about global pandemics. It's about these inescapable global issues that no nation alone can deal with. And so we are holding that flame, if you like, for those, for that more global inclusion, which is incredibly remote. And, I ask myself every day why we bother to continue, Nico. But I do think, I do think SIMPOL has got these unique features that we discussed in the beginning, which I haven't seen any, believe me, if some other proposal or thing came along that looked more promising, I'd drop SIMPOL tomorrow, because it's a lot of work and not much return for it. But I haven't seen anything that makes more sense and that includes democratic nations, non-democratic nations, can involve the citizen electoral pressure, and the multi-issue framework. So we just keep going. We just keep going. So
this is really interesting, because on the one hand, you're presenting this as almost as a sort of an apolitical, really, something that is it's a tool. But on the other hand, you are a globalist, and I can hear from the way you're talking that it's quite dear to you, quite close to your heart. So this is.
Sorry, Nico, can I say, we're not globalist. I would say we're internationalist.
Or internationalist, yes.
Globalist tends to be quite a loaded term. We are about making individual nation states stronger through cooperation, not about tearing down borders or, all of that stuff.
No, my point why I used the term globalist is because, and I'm happy to use internationalist instead, but the reason why I use that term is because I sense you're very inclusive. So you said it's about not just the democratic nation, it's about all nations. It's not just about the West, it's about the West and the East. It's not just the Northern Hemisphere, it's also about the global South. And so I sense there is a sort of I can't, for the lack of a better word, a global vision. Which transcends national interest, but of course, without negating national interest. And I think that's
exactly, because this is the point, and this is another unique aspect of SIMPOL is that it doesn't, people will say, well, what policies could be included in SIMPOL and what wouldn't be included. And so we have a very clear test for any proposal, and that test is, would the unilateral implementation of the policy by a single nation or a restricted group of nations, such as the European Union, for example, would it be likely to cause that nation or group a significant competitive disadvantage, yes or no? So if the answer is no, it wouldn't, then it's a unilateral policy. It wouldn't have anything to do with SIMPOL. It doesn't qualify for inclusion. So in that sense, the national interest is fully protected. If, on the other hand, the answer is yes, it would cause a competitive disadvantage, then it qualifies for inclusion in SIMPOL. And then, it is in the national interest to cooperate to implement it, right? So it's a win-win. And, so you're protecting national sovereignty where it's appropriate, and you're enhancing it for those issues where currently nations can't act because of the competition problem.
It occurs to me, because it's so commonsensical, that what sort of stands between SIMPOL and its implementation is just a huge wall of complexity. If we would have a kind of a bot, like some kind of device, like this, this kind of AI kind of bot, and we could just sort of say, well, here's a problem. Here are the world's countries. Tell us, is this a SIMPOL proposition? And the bot would say, yes, it is, because of X, Y, Z, indisputable. At that point, you would have a business case, wouldn't you? But of course, to do the kind of the number crunching and to do the analysis is such a massive undertaking and so difficult. And of course, information to come by is so hard to come by that in a way that's a kind of hurdle, isn't it? It's like, there's all this but ifs and ifs and buts and.
There is, but I would say two things. One, I think that we do have the ingenuity and the technology to solve these issues if we put our mind to it. And the other thing, Nico, I would say is when the water really gets up to here, you'd be really surprised what we can do. You know, the problem is, I think that, as you were saying, these issues are still not perceived as being sort of, you know, the water is still round by our ankles. People are aware of it. It's not up to our necks yet, certainly not for those of us in the West. So,
well, you see, this bit of your logic, I'm not entirely sure whether I agree with that. My experience, or my sort of senses, is that when the going gets tough, people withdraw into their shells. And then this is exactly what we're seeing at the moment. So really the best time to implement SIMPOL isn't when the water is up to our necks, but the best time to implement SIMPOL would be when we basically all lie on the beach. Because at that point we feel safe, you know, we feel comfortable. And I think there is a problem there, because of course we need it most when the water is right up here, but that's also when we're most hesitant to actually kind of to give it a go.
Yeah, Nico, I completely agree with you, of course, but you know, so, yeah, I suppose when I look myself in the mirror and I ask myself, John, when did you really ever take responsibility and grow up? Well, it was only when there was some kind of crisis. And I think, you know, if we're honest with ourselves, you know, although yes, of course, we should act sooner before things get to a crisis point, you know, unfortunately, the human condition is not that sensible.
It's a really complex, and there's no, and as I said, there's no, what I find really incredible is that there's a bunch of people, you know, working with you on this, presumably without receiving payment, without, without being offered whatever, you know, status or, you know, ministerial limousines. No, they do this simply for the love of it and because they believe in it. And you yourself, we're now in the year 2023, and you launched this in 2023 years on, and you're still going. And I think it's that kind of steadfastness really that is needed with some of these most challenging and most complex. I mean, you know, if it was an easy problem to solve, it would have long been solved, wouldn't it? I mean, that's
exactly,
you know, and we're probably in this conversation just scratch the surface of complexity. I mean, like, you know, with every layer that we take off, there's going to be another set of problems that are going to be, you know, impenetrable. So, but of course, you have to go on with it and you have to develop it. Now, let me ask you this. Can you foresee a point at all when you would say, that's it? I mean, you know, I've tried everything. We're kind of making fools of ourselves. Actually, you know, it's kind of become a joke. Let's stop it. Can you foresee a point? Have you got a mental sort of a thing in your mind where say, well, if you reach that point, then that's it? Or are you not allowing yourself to go there?
Well, certainly, and I wish it would happen tomorrow, is that some other institution would somehow manage to solve this problem, but it doesn't look like it. So I'll just keep going as long as I can, Nico, really, and I'm sure that my colleagues will go on as long as they feel they can. But you know, I don't know. I think it's important to keep the model alive because, as I said, it's unique. It has sort of unique properties, as you say. It's shown, you know, that the number of MPs that we've actually got is, considering the relatively low number of support we have around the world, is actually quite successful. And I think that's an indication of the power of the idea.
Now let me just, I just had this idea.
We just keep going. We just keep going, basically.
Let me just put this proposal to you. What if, to your list of MPs and the methodology you have developed for essentially recruiting them, because obviously they have to sign up to your pledge and they have to sign up to a process. So they're not just getting something for free, they actually have to give something in return. So how if you would develop a, if you like, equivalent stream for chief execs, for business leaders?
Yeah, this is something that we're trying to develop right now, Nico. We want to engage with the business community to have a similar thing. You know, you could imagine that companies could just, you know, could declare their support for SIMPOL and just carry the you know, we support SIMPOL logo. We would be very happy to have that kind of endorsement from business. We don't accept any funding from corporations, because obviously we have to remain politically independent, but they could certainly support the process and the idea, and, you know, use it to promote the idea through their supply chains and so forth.
But if you just, I mean, this, I'm just sort of throwing out ideas. So I have, and they're not really digested. But say, for example, you would run with this idea of the carbon sort of reduction kind of idea. You would say, you would kind of, you know, like add to this some kind of global tax. Say, for example, a token, like a transactions tax, or even a digital tax, or whatever. You know, there's different kind of global taxes one can think of. And you sort of basically put this into a kind of a package. And then you kind of go to the business community and say, don't give us money, but if this goes ahead, you're going to basically be one of the key sponsors, in the same way as people sponsor the COP, you know, Conference of Parties, like COP27 now. You've got, you know, and so this would send a very strong signal that, say, for instance, you know, whatever, Microsoft, you know, commits like 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, if a deal in this area is struck. And you build up the pressure that way. So that adds extra pressure, of course, to politicians, because now they even have the money to do it. It basically gives you a massive endorsement, because it means that somebody actually looked at what you're putting forward, like somebody in the business community, and doesn't think of it as detrimental to business interest. And it also means that, you know, the electorate, the people voting for business, also now basically might become customers of those businesses, because you get them in two ways. So to me, that seems to be.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly we would be open to exploring any ways that we can involve and get the support of business, providing that any financial support does not compromise our political independence. Because I think it's incredibly important that we remain above that and seem to be above that, because otherwise you then just become like a political party, you know, and that then
but of course the idea would be that that funding would be available to the people who do the deal. So you know, you would literally.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, if it was something like that, that's certainly something that could be part of it and would certainly help. Yeah.
And of course, until there is a deal, this is on the never, because no money changes hands. All it says is, well, if there is a deal, then we will be supporting that deal with so many, whatever, millions or whatever.
Yes, I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities like that, Nico. Yeah, no, I mean, you know, if this thing, you know, but we've got to get the concept more widely known and more widely supported. And, you know, if we can, I think then one could really, those kind of ideas could really start to be developed very, very quickly and very well. So everything's possible.
So looking ahead for, let's say, the next 12 months, John, what, I mean, clearly there's going to be more of the same. You'll continue to knock at politicians' doors. You know, I mean, from what I understand, your main platform tends to be elections, isn't that right? Because it's at that point where politicians like to be endorsed, or like to sort of seek endorsement, as it were.
Yeah. Elections are the most active time for us. Yes, for sure.
Sort of looking ahead the next 12 months, is there any kind of election in your, like, on your radar where you think that this would be a good election to kind of to recruit more politicians?
Well, I think there's one in Luxembourg. I don't think we'll get one in the UK until 2024. So not too many this year, unfortunately. But yeah, we'll certainly have a crack in Luxembourg and see what we can do there.
Are you only pitching it at the national level for national politicians?
Yeah. Yes, because I mean, any politician could sign up if they want, but really it's national politicians that have the responsibility for international treaties and international relations. So that it's that level that we're really focused on, not on the local level.
I mean, on the one end of the spectrum, there's countries like Luxembourg, and on the other end of the scale, there's countries like the US. When it comes to countries like the US, or specifically the US, are you making any inroads there, or is this kind of like a country that you haven't cracked yet?
We're struggling to get any foothold really in the US because it's such a big country. It's very difficult to communicate with politicians if you're not a constituent, you know, if you're not a citizen in their district. So yeah, we're struggling in the US, but you know, in Europe we're doing well. So it's really a question of getting it going in one part of the world. Other people then start to see it. Oh, and then things can start spreading. So I think the key thing is really to make sure that we make an impact somewhere, and then hopefully the word will spread.
What about the Southern Hemisphere? Are you at all interested in kind of signing up politicians in places like Kenya or Nigeria or South Africa?
I think we have got one or two in Zimbabwe. I mean, we would be, but we just haven't got the people on the ground there in those countries at the moment. So you know, that's again, we're hoping that, you know, if we can get going in Western Europe, hopefully the word will spread east and west and south. But it's a long process, and you know, I think, you know, the business community, I agree with you, would be perhaps the best for us. But it's a shame that the NGO community don't or can't or won't take a closer look, because, you know, when you're as old as I am and you've seen, you know, the protests against the WTO back in the 80s and 90s and so forth, you know, the global justice movement just has really not got anywhere. And that is because it does not have a coherent electoral strategy that is suited for a globalized or for transnational type problems. And SIMPOL would be a perfect gift for them. But as you say, there's a culture gap there.
Have you ever tried to somehow cozy up to the UN itself? Did you ever have any contact with the UN?
Not directly, no. We would like to, Nico, but we just haven't been able to find the contacts, unfortunately, so far. So yeah, you know, we need more exposure. We need more people to talk about it. We need more people who do have those contacts to tell people about what we're doing. So we're trying everything we can, of course.
Of course. If people want to get, if viewers or listeners want to get involved with SIMPOL, hearing our conversation and say, well, that's actually interesting, I want to get involved, how would they get in touch? What would they do? Would they contact you through the website? Or
yeah, they can go to our website, simpol.org, and there's email addresses there and contact details for all the for me and also for all our national coordinators. So yeah, they should go through the website, and we'll be happy to hear from them.
What kind of, I mean, with a lot of kind of projects of that kind of global scale, a lot of people say, well, what can I contribute? I mean, what can I do? And of course, that stops a lot of people from getting involved, even though they might be really useful and could help a great deal, but they just don't see what they could be doing.
Yeah.
Well, what do your members do? I mean, what kind of profile are you looking for?
Well, the first thing they can do is they can actually sign up. And we have had one or two occasions when just one person signing, which we then forward to their local, their member of parliament, and the member of parliament has signed up just on the basis of one of their constituents supporting the campaign. So, even just your signature joining the campaign can have an effect. But then, there's all the sort of campaigning work. If you want to get more involved, there's, you want to get local groups going where people in their local area get together to put pressure on their member of parliament to sign up. Excuse me. And then there's all sorts of other work that we need to do in terms of outreach, in terms of marketing and campaigning and social media and so forth. So, and
presumably in each kind of sort of like national chapter or in each sort of group that sort of exists, there will be at least one person that they can go to and can seek advice, maybe even get some mentoring or get some, some help.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in some countries, we don't have anybody. So if there's somebody who wants to make a start, we'll obviously give them the support, and, they can join the crew, this merry band of SIMPOL nutcases who are continuing this this project. So yeah, it's everything there to play for.
Excellent. John, at the very end, one more thing. I'm thinking I'm going to go through the reboot kind of methodology, what we have done, how we're going to take it forward. And two things that I hope to do. One is we're going to carry on with the regular reboot dialogue. So our next reboot dialogue would essentially be in roughly about 12 months' time, and we catch up and see how SIMPOL has developed during that time. Another thing I want to do is to see with different reboot partners whether we can organize reboot specials. And this is, for example, in our case, that could mean to do like a reboot special around, intergovernmental cooperation and AI, international artificial intelligence. There's other kind of reboot specials that we're thinking about, but they would be one-offs, just focusing on a specific issue. And so alongside the once a year dialogues, the idea is to have like maybe dotted throughout a couple of reboot specials. And the third thing that is sort of emerging now is what I'd like to do is some kind of a reboot publication along the lines of, recreating the world, or, rethinking the world, and to bring together a number of sort of path-breaking, transformational initiatives like SIMPOL, but there's a whole bunch of people that do reboot dialogues where I think that it would be really interesting to bring them together in a book. Would you be potentially be interested in contributing to such a publication?
Yeah, of course, for sure. I'd be happy to. Yeah.
I mean, that would then come in the form of like a paper or an essay or whatever, and sort of to basically to tell the SIMPOL story and so on and so forth. And of course, what we would try to do is to sort of select projects, initiatives, campaigns that somehow also cross-fertilize. So you can see that if they all go forward, that they have a sort of a synergetic impact as well. So that's, that's also hopefully in the second half of this year, like I'll be sort of beginning to collect proposals over the next couple of months, and hopefully in the second half of this year, we can sort of start to pull this together into a publication and maybe publish it early in 2024. I mean, that's roughly the kind of the time frame I'm sort of looking at the moment.
Yeah, I'll it depends on my time availability at the time, but sure, I'd be interested to help and contribute if I possibly can. Yeah, good idea.
Excellent. John, thank you very, very much for being my guest today again.
Well, thank you.
I know my questions aren't what can you say? It's a struggle. And I know you're doing your best, and I'm a great fan of yours. You can be assured of that. It takes a very special person to do what you're doing, and thank you for staying the course.
Thank you, Nico. I mean, I think it also, it's great to have people like you who are connecting people, who are putting these projects out there, because if people don't hear about it, you can't sell if you don't tell, and you're telling. So that's great. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. So we'll catch up behind the camera, as it were, over the next couple of weeks through email and so on and so forth. And hopefully do a reboot special at some point during the year as well. And then hopefully a publication in the latter part of this year.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
John, thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.